Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to Neil Adams about From the Pile. Neil wrote a loving biography of a good friend of his that he knew in New York. And so tell the audience what From the Pile is about so I don't overtalk it.
No problem. Well, thank you so much again for having me, Dan. So From the Pile is the life story of my friend Michael Dorian, who I met back in 1993. We became very fast friends. I found his life fascinating at that time. I mean, it was just diametrically opposed to my life. And once I started learning more about it, I was talking to him. I said, Michael, I would love to write your story. And he loved the idea of it and started telling me all about his life up to that point. And we got to a few points in his life that he wasn't necessarily very proud about, which he shouldn't have been. And so I dropped it, but I always kind of kept the idea in the back of my mind. And as our friendship evolved and went through its ups and downs over the years, and I was still, part of his life. Actually, we did have a breakup for a while. That story's in the book. But when we reconnected again and learned about everything that happened, including his time on 9/11 and all his health issues there, his whole life was just amazing. So he had a lot of relationship challenges. He got AIDS very young. He was diagnosed with AIDS at 16. And that story of how that happened is also in the book. And so he was fighting health things. And when 9/11 happened, he wanted to help. He figured like his life was going to be shortened anyway. And he knew he had an access into it because he was a veterinary technician, but he had scrubs. And so when he went down there, they assumed that on 9/11, he was a doctor and he could help. And so they sent him out onto, I believe it was the North Tower, to help with rescue efforts and help the firefighters who were doing the rescue efforts. And he ended up contracting a mutated form of skin cancer because of his time on the pile that day on 9/11. And obviously he didn't know that at the time. He was just glad he could help. It changed his perspective. He decided he really wanted to do more to help. He became a volunteer police officer after that time. And all during those times and his health challenges with AIDS, he had a lot of challenges with relationships in his life, especially his family. His mother in particular was a challenge.
That's an understatement, Neil.
Yeah, that's an understatement. So you'd have to read the book to find out exactly why. But also his relationships. He was a victim of a lot of gaslighting, I would say, in his life. And basically what Michael really wanted out of his life was just to have a loving, normal life. He wanted to get married. He wanted to have kids. He wanted to have a home and just enjoy his life. He was a very loving, generous, funny, fun, smart person who had a lot of adversity in his life. And he tried to make up for a lot of the mistakes that he had made early in his life. So I charted his story.
I love it. And, one of the things that you as the author point out is that Michael spent the majority of his life being a people pleaser, and people pleasers sort of, we come at it from different directions. I believe I'm a people pleaser because I was always trying to please my mom, who had a bombastic temper. And I think that I'm fortunate that I have not had unhealthy relationships. But I can see how it's very easy to fall into that, trying to make someone else love you or feel for you or be empathetic with you. And the fact that Michael, given the situation that he had with an abandoned father and I rarely say someone that's horrible, but Harriet's horrible. That's his mother. Yeah. And I mean, every time my mom said about her sister, the reason she never made up with her sister is she said, the snake will bite you eventually. It doesn't matter. She's like, every time I try, I get bit. And I think, or bitten. And I think that's the same with Michael. I think every time he tried to make up with Harriet, she bit him again.
She bit him again every time. And I mean, he went to, go ahead, Dan.
I'm sorry. I was going to say even after death.
Yeah, even after death, she still tried to take a bite out of him.
Yes.
And twice. And,
right.
And that was her, unfortunately. And, I saw it, but, he was like, it's my mother, and I have to try to please her. And he was, the only child of hers that graduated college and even graduated high school, and tried to make something of his life. And she tried to like siphon as much out of that for her own well-being as she possibly could. But, as a people pleaser too, Michael also tried to do the same thing with his relationships. And like you, Dan, I'm also a people pleaser. So I completely do that. And I get wanting to make people happy and try to help them in their lives and their careers, which is, what I tried to do with Michael too, just in an advisory way. But he was just really trapped. I mean, he, was gaslight. He was gaslit a lot with a lot of his relationships because they saw him as a people pleaser. So they knew they could use him and tell him whatever they thought he wanted to hear. So
that's right. And I do say that I've been very, very lucky in my life in the fact that given the level of people pleasing that I try to bring, I've not been taken advantage of. So I've been very fortunate in that. I cannot say the same for Michael. I mean, I bless him. He started out hard, and and the fact that he got a high school diploma and a college degree is amazing because he fought the odds along the way. He surely did.
The odds were definitely against him. I mean, his older half brother was a criminal. But Michael looked up to him. He saw that he was making a lot of money stealing cars. And so Michael tried to do that, but got caught. And so that didn't work out for him. But he looked a lot older than he was. And he knew he was gay. And he decided to become a male prostitute in order to make money when he was a teenager. And that's how he got sick, just kind of hooking up with men, getting paid for it, making some money that way. And then luckily, one of the people that he hooked up with rescued him from his life, from his mother. He just kind of realized that Michael had potential, that Michael was smart. He was really a good person with a good soul who was just dealt a really crappy hand. And he took him out of that life and helped him turn his life around, graduate high school, go to college, graduate college, and set him on the course to lead a more responsible life.
So in the book, Neil, and I'm asking out of my own curiosity, did Michael and Richard ever make up a relationship later on, or when they separated, they just went their ways?
They went their ways. Michael let that relationship go. I mean, he knew that. I mean, his relationship with Richard really started off, as a client, let's say.
Right. Yes, that's right.
And he treated him as like every one of his other clients, although he had a relationship with him. But once Richard brought Michael into his life, Michael said that, no more sex or anything, that we're just going to, that stopped. And then he knew that Richard probably wanted more, especially as Michael started growing older and more mature. And
legal. We should point out that
legal. Absolutely.
Richard did not know he was underage when he first met him.
No, he didn't. No one did. Michael lied about his age.
Yep.
So that was on him. But once he found out, Richard was like, I'm not doing this anymore, and was very responsible. And really, Michael really tips his hat to what Richard did for him. But he just, at some point, he said, like, I know I'm going to be leading Richard on if I continue to see him. And he didn't want to do that. He wanted Richard to have his own relationships in his life. And so he kind of let that go. And
I thought that was probably one of the highlights of the book to me, was the fact that because, so see how much I'm willing to share. So I used to rescue dancers in Florida. I had this talent for knowing whether they were housed or unhoused. And if they were unhoused, I offered them a place to stay for one night, to give them a chance, because I always used to think, so I have blonde hair, and I always used to think, where will I dry my hair? And I couldn't abide by the thought of someone not having a roof over their head at night. I mean, I don't know how anybody lives like that. I just don't.
Yeah, I don't either. Well, bless your heart, Dan. That's wonderful.
And the funny thing is, like Richard, they were hands off when they spent the night. There was no hanky panky. It was just I knew that they needed a place to catch one decent night of sleep.
Yeah,
and they all said yes.
Yeah, and that's wonderful. I mean, I'm the same. I mean, I would love to have the ability to rescue more people, but I don't.
Right,
So,
right. Well,
yeah.
and I did at some point did come to realize that that was not a healthy option for me because, I did, these were people I did not know, but I have been very blessed with a sense of understanding who someone is really early on in life. I mean, I'm rarely ever fooled about who someone is because God gave me an innate sense of knowing a person when I meet them.
Well, that's great. That's
Yeah,
great.
it has saved me in a lot of ways. I'm sure I could have been used, and I fortunately was not. So, but
I'm glad you weren't. And as people pleasers, we put ourselves out there to people.
yes,
And so we take a risk of being used or being
yeah,
tricked or something like that. And so it's good that you can recognize, like, I'm willing to go this far, but not further,
but not further. That's right. That's right. And I also, I think my life in growing up had a lot of strings attached to it from my mom. And so I try not to impose that on someone else because I look at it and say, you know what? I loved my mom. We were very, very close, but she and I don't function the same way. The
Hmm.
things that she did with me, I realized I can't do with other people because I didn't like the way it made me feel. So I tried not to replicate that, even though I will say I can put dirty dishes in the sink, but if you put them in the sink, it's going to annoy me. Mine don't annoy me. So we come with our own quirks, don't we?
Very true. Very true. Yes. And I totally get that. I totally get that. And same thing. I'm like, we all loved our moms. We wanted to
Yeah,
please our parents. And that, I think that's just sort of an innate thing, no matter how, when upon reflection, we can see their faults and
sure.
see how their mistakes or their decisions or affected our lives. And that was certainly the case with Michael. I mean, he certainly didn't choose the life that he was born into, but he was lucky to be rescued from it and lucky to be extricated from it, and to a point where he could see things more, I'm trying to think of the right word, just more plainly, I guess,
Yes,
for lack of a
clearly.
better.
Yes. And I think that, because it would have also been very easy for Michael to have become homeless, I believe,
Yeah.
because, he came up in a time in New York where the rents were going up. Hell, even the Bronx is expensive now.
Mhm.
Everything in New York is expensive. And coming up when he did, I could have easily seen how becoming HIV positive at such a young age could have derailed his entire life, but it didn't. And he was a giving person. And I did think when I read the premise of the book, I thought, as much of a people pleaser as I am, I'm not sure I would have gone to the pile had I been in New York
Yeah.
because I can't control it. And I like my world a little more organized and controlled. But the fact that he gave of himself so selflessly on that day is amazing.
It is amazing. I was blown away when I learned about it. Like you, I don't think I would have gone down there either. I would have been afraid.
Yes.
Michael was like, I can help. I mean, I'm probably not going to have a long life anyway, but I have the ability. I have the education. I know I can get down there. I know I can talk my way into it, and which he did, and was there for 24 hours and made a significant impact on, well, not only his life, but hopefully the lives of others as well.
Absolutely. And there were I'm also glad about the coverage he's had since that day, both news and with Spike Lee in his
Yeah.
documentary, because we all as gay men heard horror stories of gay spouses losing their partner, the companies not paying them benefits or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so to hear that he got a little bit of recognition is a wonderful thing because unfortunately, Neil and I talked about this before we started recording. COVID, we got a great response for COVID in this nation, in the fact that I think a lot of people came together 6 feet apart, but we came together as a consensus that we needed to look out for each other. AIDS, however, was just the opposite. I
Yeah.
mean, I think it had been diagnosed for 8 or 9 years before a president even mentioned the word AIDS. I
Correct.
mean, it was just horrific. And I remember going to New York and then subsequently to San Francisco during those times where it looked like a mass of zombies walking around.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that time really well too, and it was a very scary time for us gay men, just knowing
Yes.
not what was going to happen. And Michael contracted AIDS or HIV or AIDS, before we even knew what it was.
Yes.
It's 83, I think, is when he was diagnosed with it, and we first started learning about it in 81, and he was only 16 when he was diagnosed. But Michael was also a fighter. Michael
Yes.
was a survivor and was determined to live and get as far as he could possibly get. But he was also selfless too. So, on that day, he was like, I'm going to go down there. I can help. I mean, I'm glad he survived it, but a lot of luck happened too. I mean, the fact that they discovered, no, people who haven't read this book will learn this, but once they discovered that Michael wasn't a doctor, like a medical doctor, a human doctor, and found out that he was a veterinary technician, they asked him to leave that day, which he didn't want to do, but he did. And he ran into a reporter who was interviewing people who were down there on 9/11. And so Michael was one of many interviews that this particular reporter had that day. And when he found out years later that he had stage 4 skin cancer, a mutated form of it, and he knew he was entitled money from the World Trade Center Fund, which he was able to prove that was pretty easy for him. But the kind of money that he needed for the treatments in order to treat his cancer were experimental. They were $100,000 a treatment. And so he needed to get money from the Victims' Compensation Fund in order to help him get that money. But he had to prove he was actually there on that day, because even though he had everything that he wore that day stuffed in a box, with the remnants, with the soot and the debris and everything that was on his clothing and everything there, they said, like, yeah, but you could have got that on 9/12 or 9/13 because that stuff was still there. So how do we know you were actually there on 9/11? Well, this interview was the proof that he needed. But in order to find that reporter and find that interview was a whole detective hunt. And the fact that he was became a part of the new NYPD helped him befriend a detective who helped him find the man and get the money that he needed to survive. So that was a whole part of his story too, which is even just a minute part of his story.
Yes, but an incredible life.
Yeah.
I mean, and that so he moved to Pennsylvania, and why did he move to Pennsylvania from New York?
Well, he was bouncing around a lot. He always wanted to have a home, and he knew he wanted to have a home, and what he could afford was going to be something in Pennsylvania, not in New Jersey, up in the Poconos where, real estate was less expensive. He found a really sweet little cabin home on a creek up in the Poconos, and it was just a nice little respite from the city, and he found a new life there. It started off as just sort of like a getaway place, sort of like a vacation home. But then as the years went on, that became more of his permanent home. Apartments that he had for years, he had lost, or, from partners of places he had lived. So he was pretty migratory, I would suppose, in his life. When he was in New York, he didn't really care where he slept. He had friends who he would stay with. He would stay at his veterinary he would stay at the vet. He would sleep overnight there sometimes if he was going to, work there that night or the next morning or something. So he would stay with friends. But the home in Pennsylvania was his, and that was one of his dreams to have that. And so that's why he decided to do that.
And I loved that. So because when you're approaching the end of your life, you want to be comfortable. That's every human's desire. Yeah. No one wants to keep fighting when they know that the end is imminent. We want to rest, and it's hard to get a rest when you're in a constant migratory mood or whatever.
No, you just never know where I'm going to sleep one night. And as the disease progressed, and as he started becoming more tired, and also discovering that he really liked his life in Pennsylvania, he was happy being there more often than being back in the city or back in New Jersey or something.
So, I don't blame him for that. I really don't. So, and it's nice because he also had Aaron at the end of his life, and he still had you as well, even though you were back in California. So.
Yeah, I mean, the distance between us was definitely hard, although we spoke on the phone all the time and FaceTimed a lot, especially during COVID during COVID is when he really got sick. But before that, we would talk on the phone all the time, and we would go and visit each other as often as we could. I mean, I was always wanting to come back and visit him, but he was very particular and protective of me. He said, like, I don't want you coming back in the winter because we can't do anything in the winter. If you're going to come back and spend the money, I want to do it at a time when we can go out and do things and explore and have some adventures. And so he was always careful about when I would go to see him, but he would come out and see me more often than I was able to go out and see him. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, again, the book is called From the Pile. It's by Neil Adams. It is so wonderful. Highly recommended. Thank you, Neil, for being here today.
Dan, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I hope you have a lot of success with the book.
Thank you. I hope so too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.